Princes vanishing in the Tower. Two boys entered the Tower of London in the summer of 1483 and were never seen again. Edward, aged 12, was the rightful king of England, following his father Edward IV's death. His younger brother Richard, Duke of York, joined him shortly after. Their uncle, Richard of Gloucester, had himself declared Richard III, and both boys declared illegitimate before their disappearance. No bodies were conclusively identified, no trial was ever held, and no confession was ever recorded. Richard III remains the primary suspect, though later candidates have included Henry VII. The case has never been closed. Henry VIII and his 6 wives. The drive for a male heir produced one of the most consequential series of royal marriages in European history. Catherine of Aragon was divorced after failing to produce a surviving son, a process that required Henry to break with the Catholic Church entirely and establish the Church of England. Anne Boleyn was executed on charges of adultery and treason that most historians now regard as fabricated. Jane Seymour died after childbirth. Anne of Cleves was annulled within months. Catherine Howard was executed. Catherine Parr survived him. 2 divorced, 2 beheaded, 1 died, 1 survived. Death of Amy Robsart. The death of Amy Robsart in September 1560 ended any realistic prospect of Elizabeth I marrying the man she was closest to. Amy was Robert Dudley's wife, and she was found dead at the bottom of a staircase with a broken neck. Because Dudley's relationship with the Queen was widely known, including by foreign ambassadors whose letters survive, his wife's sudden death looked to many like a calculated removal. An inquest returned an open verdict. Dudley was never charged. Elizabeth never married him nor anyone else, which is why the circumstances of Amy's death became a permanent stain on both of them. Mary, Queen of Scots. Before she became a prisoner of her own cousin, Mary had already survived a scandal that made her position in Scotland untenable. Her second husband, Lord Darnley, was murdered in 1567 when the house he was sleeping in was blown up. Mary then married the Earl of Bothwell, widely suspected of organizing the murder. Within 3 months, Scottish nobles forced her to abdicate, and she fled to England, seeking refuge from Elizabeth I. That refuge lasted 19 years of house arrest. She was executed in 1587 after being implicated in a plot against Elizabeth's life, having never recovered her throne. Charles II's illegitimate children. The king acknowledged at least 12 illegitimate children fathered by a series of openly kept mistresses. He had no legitimate children with his wife, Catherine of Braganza, which is why the crown passed to his Catholic brother James instead of a Protestant heir. The most prominent of his acknowledged sons, James Scott, Duke of Monmouth, later led an unsuccessful rebellion against James II. Charles's willingness to publicly support his illegitimate children, while the succession crisis intensified around him, was a defining feature of his court and a direct cause of the political instability that followed his death. George IV and Caroline of Brunswick. The marriage was a disaster from the first meeting. George reportedly asked for brandy when he saw his intended for the first time. The two separated within a year and spent the following decades in open hostility. When George became king in 1820, he attempted to have Parliament dissolve the marriage and strip Caroline of her title, citing her alleged adultery with an Italian servant. The public trial became a spectacle, and Caroline became a popular symbol of resistance to a dissolute king. The bill was abandoned, but George still barred the doors of Westminster Abbey during his coronation to prevent her from entering. George IV's secret £650,000 debt. Long before he became king, George accumulated debts that reached the equivalent of tens of millions in today's terms, primarily through construction projects, gambling, and luxury spending without restraint. The $650,000 figure, the total Parliament agreed to settle in 1795, was the price of persuading him to marry Caroline of Brunswick at all, since the marriage came with a guaranteed income large enough to service what he owed. Parliament had already bailed him out once before. His spending on the Royal Pavilion in Brighton and Carlton House continued regardless, making his marriage a financial transaction as much as a dynastic one. Edward VIII and the abdication. The reign lasted 326 days. Edward VIII became king in January 1936, and by December had signed the first voluntary relinquishment of the British crown in recorded history. The reason was his intention to marry Wallis Simpson, an American whose second divorce was not yet finalized when the crisis came to a head. The Church of England, of which the monarch is the supreme governor, did not permit remarriage after divorce. The government made clear it would not support the marriage. Edward chose Simpson and broadcast his decision by radio. His brother became George VI. Edward spent the rest of his life abroad, holding no further public role. Princess Margaret and Peter Townsend forbidden love. The relationship was the first major royal romantic scandal of the post-war period, and it ended for the same reason as the abdication before it. Princess Margaret wished to marry Group Captain Peter Townsend, a decorated RAF officer who had been a trusted equerry to her father. The problem was that Townsend was divorced. Under the Royal Marriages Act and the conventions of the Church of England, the Queen could not approve the marriage without triggering a constitutional conflict. In 1955, after 2 years of public speculation and private deliberation, Margaret announced she would not marry him. She cited her duty to the Commonwealth and the Church. Queen Elizabeth II's Annus Horribilis. In a public speech in November 1992, Queen Elizabeth II described that year using the Latin phrase for horrible year, saying she would not look back on it with undiluted pleasure. 3 of her 4 children's marriages were either ending or had ended publicly within 12 months. Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson separated, Princess Anne divorced and remarried, and Charles and Diana's separation was announced in December. The same year saw the publication of recordings of Diana's private conversations and a fire that severely damaged Windsor Castle. The accumulation made 1992 the single most damaging year to the monarchy's public standing in the modern era. Charles, Diana, and Camilla love triangle. The wedding in 1981 was watched by an estimated 750 million people worldwide, but the marriage had difficulties from the start. Charles had a long prior relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, which resumed during the marriage. Diana's own account, given in a 1995 BBC interview watched by 23 million people in the UK, described a marriage in which 3 people were present. The separation came in 1992, the divorce in 1996. Charles married Camilla in 2005. The episode reshaped public expectations of transparency from royal figures and damaged the institution's standing in ways that took years to recover from. Death of Diana. The crash in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel on 31 August 1997 killed Diana, Princess of Wales, along with Dodi Fayed and the driver Henry Paul. Investigations concluded the cause was a collision resulting from Henri Paul's impaired driving and the pursuit by paparazzi photographers. The royal family's muted public response, the flag at Buckingham Palace was not lowered, and the Queen remained in Scotland, became a crisis of its own. The scale of public grief was large enough that the Queen returned to London and made a televised address, something she had rarely done outside of scheduled broadcasts. Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein. The association became publicly indefensible when Jeffrey Epstein was arrested in 2019 on federal sex trafficking charges. Andrew had maintained a friendship with Epstein for years, including visits after Epstein's 2008 conviction for soliciting prostitution from a minor. A BBC interview in which Andrew attempted to address the matter directly was widely judged to have worsened his position. He stepped back from royal duties shortly after. In 2022, he reached a civil settlement with Virginia Giuffre, who had accused him of sexual abuse, without admitting liability. His military titles and royal patronages were removed and have not been restored. Harry and Meghan's Oprah interview. The decision to step back from senior royal duties was announced in January 2020, but the couple's reasons became fully public in March 2021 in a 2-hour interview with Oprah Winfrey. The interview contained allegations that a member of the royal family had raised concerns about the skin color of their unborn child, that Meghan had been denied mental health support while experiencing suicidal thoughts, and that the institution would not protect them from media hostility. Buckingham Palace responded that recollections may differ. The interview was watched by around 17 million people in the UK and generated thousands of complaints to the broadcasting regulator. From the disappeared heirs of 1483 to the televised accusations of 2021, British royal scandals follow a consistent pattern. What makes them explosive is never just the private behavior itself, but the collision between that behavior and an institution whose authority depends on being seen to stand above it.